Shalom, Shuki.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes. There we go.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Okay, all right. We're good, it's ready on. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 prakim of Rambam, Hilchos Tefilah, Ubirchas Kohanim, prakim Beis Gimel Daled, starting with Perek Sheni, with the second chapter that speaks all about rabbinic prayer, meaning the specific nusach of the Shmoneh Esrei, which is really not 18, but it became 19, about the tefillahs that we make on Shabbos and on Yom Tov and on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the additions, everything connected to the Nusach HaTefillah will be in this second chapter. We're going to have here 19 halachas, starting with halacha Aleph. Says the Rambam, Bimei Rabban Gamliel, during the days of Rabban Gamliel, a big machloikis, whether this is referring to Hillel Hazaken's grandson, which lived during the times of the Bayesheni, or is this his grandson, which is who we call normally Rabban Gamliel of Yavne, whichever one it is, says the Rambam, Rabu Haminim B'Yisrael. The numbers of heretics amongst the Jewish people tragically increased. V'hoyu mitzeidim liYisrael umasisen oisen, they would oppress us, they would entice us, lashuv ma'achri Hashem. So either we are referring to the Tzedukim, or to what they turned into, to the early Christians. It's one of these two. And v'kivin shera'u shezu gedoyle mikol tzarech ben hayadam, that the greatest need we have is, as the Rambam began with Yisoid HaYisoid is Va'amud HaChachmas. In other words, people have to have Slicha, and people need to have Geula, and people have to have Refuah, and people have to have a Parnasa. But if the mind is not correct, if the ideas are wrong, if one rejects the emes of Hashem and of Achdus Hashem, that leads to all the other tzaddis. So this became the biggest issue. Amad hu ubeis dinai vehiskin bracha acha shetia ba she'ela melifnei Hashem la'abed hamin. In other words, it's a request of Hashem to annihilate all of these heretics. And v'kava oisa batfilam kedei sheti arucha b'fi hakoil, for it to be arranged in the mouth of all, as we learned yesterday. That's the advantage of having the nusach of the Shmoneh Esrei. And nimsu, now it comes out that kol habracha shebatfilah cha esei brachas. There's a big topic when we learned the Gemara, we spoke about it, whether he actually formulated the V'la Malshinim, or maybe when the Anshe Knesses Hagdola, when they wrote the Shmoneh Esrei, or really even prior, there was an option of adding the V'la Malshinim, and what Rabban Gamliel decided is that it should be inserted in there permanently. But now we have really 19 brachas. Says Rambam Halacha Beis. B'chol tefillah sheb'chol yom. So let's go. On a regular day, you can come closer, Aaron. You have a table here in the middle. Mispalel Adam Shai Sebrachas Elu Ala Seder. The Seder that we mentioned. Bamed Varam Amurim Kishamatza Dati Michuvenes Ulushoni Tamar Likres. When should we read every day all 19 when one's concentration is not disturbed? And when one is able to read fluently. These are two separate things. You have to have kavanah. Some people have good kavanah. For some reason, there's something called being tongue-tied. It's a gaitnisht. So when things are going, read all 19. However, person is distracted, a person is bothered, a person is not distracted. But for some reason, now guys, what we're learning now is not Tefilah Katzara. That's something we're going to learn about later. This is called Havinenu. This is a proper tefillah. However, what should one do? Yispalal shalosh rishonos. All the three first are exactly the way they are. Ubracha achas me'en kol ha'mitzvos, and then there's going to be one bracha that has in its content mamish the same of all of the middle now 13. V'shalosh achronos, and the proper elongated version of the three blessings that we call the blessings of Thanksgiving, and v'yotza yedei chayvase, and one fulfills one's obligation. Says Rambam, v'zoi abracha shetiknu me'en kol ha'mitzvos. Okay, this is the nusach of this middle bracha. All right, which we call Havinenu. So it begins with the words Havinenu, Hashem Elokeinu Ladas Es Derochecha, Umaylas Levaveinu Liyirasecha. Chevra, we don't have time because we're going through this quickly, but if you'll mamish see how it's covering not only every topic, but on the order, on the seder of the middle brachas. L'sloyach Heyei Lanu Kama Liyois Geulim and Rachakenu Mimachoiv Vidashnenu v'shachnenu b'no ois artzecha u'nefutze mei arbeit kabitz v'hatoim bedatcha yishafetu v'al harushoyim tonef yodecha al harushoyim tonef yodecha. That's in the place of Alam al Shinim. V'yismechu tzadikim b'binyan irecha b'tikun heichalecha u'b'tzmichus keren l'dovad avdecha u'barichas ne'ele v'yishem mishechecha. Then we say terem nikra atosanem kadav shenemer v'hoya terem nikra v'ani ena oy dehem edabrim v'ani eshma. Ki atuhu oine b'chol eis, poide u'matzil mikol tzuka, baruch ato Hashem, shoymeya Tefilah. Says Rabbi Malach Daled, Bamed Varam Amurim, that you could be yoytze with this Havinenu. That's only b'yemais hachama, only during the summer months. Aval b'yemais hachshamim, eino mispalal Havinenu farvos nish, mipnei shetzorech loymar she'elo birchas hashonim. There's zechira, mentioning right, which is in the second bracha Atagibur, and then you have the request in the blessing of Barei Cholenu, where we say V'sein Tal Umata Levracha. The Rambam is going to say in a second, why can't you insert it in there? 1 second. Since that has to be said, that creates a problem. Similarly, even during Yemai Sachama, Motzoi Shabbosis, and Motzoi Yomim Tovim, you may not add as an option the Havinenu, Mepnei Shetzarach Leimer Havdalah B'choinen Hada'as. So here's the issue, guys. Havinenu, unlike the Shemona Esrei that we are all very familiar with, people are not that familiar with it. They didn't have a siddur then. So if there would be taka only one standard Havinenu text, plan B, Mela. But if plan B, which taka would need to have other little tweaks, people would get completely confused. That is what they go. People would forget. You start adding something, you start subtracting something. It's not adding. It's either adding she'ela or adding Havdalah. People are going to make a mistake, and therefore they said better not. Halacha 5. Ube Shabbosis, ube Yomim Tovim. Going back to the standard Shemona Esrei, even though many people call it Shemona Esrei, just like during the week it's not 18. Shabbos is also, it's not 18. Shabbos it's much less. Shabbos and Yom Tov, Mispalal Sheva Brachis, B'chol Tefilah v'Tefilah. And as we learned yesterday, Shabbos and Yom Tov, you have 4 Tefilahs because we add Musaf. Me'arba Tefilahs Shalois Hayyom. The first 3 and the last 3 are the same. U'barachem tzois is me'ein oisa hayyom. It's appropriate to that particular day. In other words, in the place of making requests, which is what we do during the week, all of those middle 12, 13 are removed, and we place this middle one. Now, the Shabbos is choismim bebrachem tzois just by saying the Kaddish HaShabbos. On Yom Tov, we seal that middle bracha by saying the Kaddish Yisrael v'Azmanim. And if it's Shabbos and Yom Tov, so we seal that bracha by mentioning both. And which one comes first? Shabbos, Tadir, V'she'enoi Tadir, frequent, less frequent. The frequent takes precedence. Mekadosh HaShabbos v'Yisrael v'Azmanim. Let's move on. On Rosh Hashanah, we seal the bracha Melech al Kol Haaretz, Mekadosh Yisrael v'Yom HaZikaron. If it's Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, again we're gonna mention Shabbos first. Right? Chosim b'Melech HaKol Haaretz, Mekadosh HaShabbos v'Yisrael v'Yom HaZikaron. And Halacha Vav, Bamed Varam Amurim, that we just threw in Rosh Hashanah like Shabbos and Yom Tov, meaning the only difference is the Chasima, but the rest is 7. No. On Rosh Hashanah, from the 4 tefillos, only 3 of them are made out of 7 brachas, which is Tefilas Arvis, Shachris, and Mincha. Abel Tefilas HaMusafim Shel Rosh Hashanah. We have this unique number. We daven a Amida prayer that is comprised of 9 blessings. First 3 and the last 3 are similar to every day, even though we'll see in a moment that really it's an elongated, the third of the three becomes a long bracha. We'll get to that soon. But at least the conclusion, aside of the Hamelach HaKadosh, she's going to speak about that also. But the first three, the last three, and then you have three middle ones. Rishonim in Amtsois in Yana Malchios. Shniya, right, Zichroinos. Shlishish, Shoifres. And V'choisen B'chol Achas Mehen Me'en Yana, as we have in our Machzor. Halacha 7. Now we mentioned that we add the tefillah of Ne'ilah, so we have 5 tefillahs. All 5 are only comprised of 7 brachas. The first 3, the last 3, and the middle one is Me'ein Hayoim. V'choisen b'chol achas mehem. What's the nusach of the chasima? Melech al kol haaretz mekadosh Yisrael v'yom HaKippurim. So again, Shabbos will be mentioned first. Choisem b'chol tefillah mehem, melech kol haaretz, mekadosh haShabbos v'Yisrael v'yom hazikaron. Halacha 8. V'yom HaKippurim. That all of the 5 tefillahs are comprised of 7 blessings. Which is something that we didn't yet experience. It's coming back with Mashiach. Then only on Yom Kippur of this 50th year, the Musaf of Yom Kippur is exactly the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. We learned this in the Gemara. Mispalal tefillas hamusaf and teisha brachas. Mamish k'moish yispalal b'musaf Rosh Hashanah. V'hein oisan habrachas atzman. There's no difference. The only difference will be the chasima, right? Loi pachos v'lo yoiser. V'hein mispalal in oisan ella. Bizman shahayovel noyeg. The Rambam uses the words that yovel is noyeg only bizman shekol yoishveh aleh. We're going to learn about this. There's the inyan of roiv yoishveh aleh. Kol Yoshvela. Bottom line is that, like the Rambam writes at the end, when Mashiach is coming, and Mashiach is coming now, we're going to come back to the counting of Yovel. Halacha 9. B'chol tefillah ma tefillos. Whenever you start Shemona Esrei, all of them share the common opening. Poiseach koidem lebracha rishoina. Hashem, right? Adnai sefasai tiftach ufi yagid tehilosecha. And this is actually considered part of the Shemona Esrei. That's important because it's that important to be soymech geula l'tefillah, as we will learn. This is not a hefsek. This is part of the Shemona Esrei. And uchshuchaisem b'soif tefillah, which is after the Hamavarechas Ama Yisrael Bashalom. Shemona Esrei is not over yet. You have to also conclude it. You have to close it. And what do we say? That Yehiyu l'ratzin imrei fi v'goymer. Then Soyed la'achayrav, we take the steps backwards. Halacha Yud. Let's keep on going. No, this whole Perek is Pashat, the Nusach of all of the Shemona Esrei brachas, which is all of rabbinic formulation. B'Rosh Chadashim and on Chol HaMoed mispalal arves achas u'mincha, the normal Shaisei brachas k'shara yomim. And however, we insert in the regular Shemona Esrei which one of the 19 in the Tefilah, in the bracha called Avodah, which begins with the words that it say Elokeinu v'Elokei Aviseinu Ya'alav V'Yaveh. On Musaf, for Musaf, Chol HaMoed mispalal tefillas hamusaf k'moish mispalal b'yom tov. B'Rosh Chadashim mispalal sheva brachos, the first 3, the last 3, and the middle one speaks about the carbon that is brought on Rosh Chodesh. And how do we conclude the middle bracha mekadosh Yisrael v'Rosh Chadashim? Halacha Yud Aleph, if Shabbos falls out on Chol HaMoed, Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos. Just to point out, he doesn't say when Chol HaMoed falls on Shabbos and when Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos. Shabbos falls on Chol HaMoed. When Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos, mispalal arvis v'shachris u'mincha shel habracha shel Shabbosos, and we say Ya'alav V'Yaveh b'Avodah. And on Musaf, here we go, maschil b'bracha emtzois me'inyan Shabbos. Well, how do we begin, guys? Ata Yetzarta, right? And we conclude be'inyan HaShabbos, and v'oimer kedushas hayom be'en sabrach. If it's Rosh Chodesh, Mekadosh HaShabbos Yisrael Rosh Chodesh. Chol HaMoed, Chaysim Ba, K'mishu Chaysim B'Yom Tov Shchaliyos B'Shabbos. Says the Rambam. Halacha Yud Beis. V'Yom Tov Shchaliyos B'Echad B'Shabbos. What's the issue if it's on Sunday? Guys, the issue is we not only make Havdalah al HaKois, but we say Havdalah in the Shemona Esrei. So where do we say the Havdalah? Mispalo B'Racha Revi'is Balayla. How does the B'Racha Revi'is begin on Yom Tov? Ata B'Chartanu. And we begin with Ata B'Chartanu. But normally we go Ata B'Chartanu to Vatiten Lanu. in between the Ata B'Chartona Vatiten Lanu, we say what we call Havdalah in Shemona Esrei. It's not the normal Ata Choin Antonu. What do we say? V'toidienu mishputei tzidkecha. V'tlamdeinu lasis chukir etzenecha. V'titel lanu Hashem l'kein kedush Shabbos. V'chvoit moyed v'chagikas regel. Ben kedush Shabbos l'kedush Yom Tov V'dalta. V'siyim ha'shviyim isheshim ha'maisei Gdashta. Can I say? Hivdalta in the parentheses, we taka have the nusach of the Hivdalta v'kedasha samchis ha'kedush secha. And then we are mamshich, this Vatita Lano Hashem Elokeinu is already the normal nusach that we do regardless. V'yadam l'simcha, chagam uzmanim l'sasin, etc. Matzei Shabbos and Matzei Yom Tov of every single year. So we're davening now a normal 19 blessing Amida, right? But we add the Atoch in, Ba'atoch Choinen, we add what we call Atoch in Antonu, and the verbal Havdalah is independent of us also making Havdalah, holding a cup of wine after we finish Maidav. Halacha 13. B'Chanukah B'Purim, where do we make an insertion? Moisifin, not by the Tzei, but Dafkin Moedim, the Al Hanisim. Shabbos, that falls out on Chanukah. So we mention Al Hanisim on the Musaf, just like Al Hanisim is mentioned in all the other tefillahs. Halacha 14. What about fast days? Afilu yachid shehisana. No additional bracha is made in private, but we insert in the bracha of Shemei Tefilah, we add over there the prayer known as Anenu. However, that's only the yachid. The yachid doesn't add another bracha. He just adds it in the Shemei Tefilah. But a shliach tzibur, oimer bracha b'fnei atzma, and where is this standalone bracha added between Goyel and Roifei? And v'choisem ba, ha'oina be'etzara, maybe u'moshia, v'nimsa mispalel, 20 brachas. Because you added the first one of today, Rabban Gamliel, the Avelam al-Shinim, and you add the standalone Anenu. B'tisha b'av, we add, not a whole bracha, but we make that insertion, right? We call that Nachem, but it's in the bracha of Boinei Yerushalayim. Racham Hashem Elokeinu, Al Yisrael Amecha, V'shayim Arech, and we go on, V'al Hu'iro Avela, right? Again, but it's not a completely separate bracha. Halacha 15.
We do a different chasima.
We don't do a different chasima. We do Bnei Yerushalayim. I'm in Lubavitch. Oh. Okay, fine. Listen, there's a lot of nuance over here, but let's keep on going. At least we are familiar with everything. Halacha Tezvav. Kol Yemais Hagshamim. During the winter season, we mention in the second bracha, which we call, let's say, Atagibayr, or the bracha of Mechaya Mesim, we say that God is Moedet HaGeshem. We say Vir Moedet Hatol. Now, now we're starting the beginning of Tainis. When do we start? Guys, what's the last day of Yom Tov of Chag? It's not what we call Yom Tov Achron Shol Chag. It's what's in the Holy Land is Yom Tov Achron Shol Chag, which is Shmini Atzeres. The Rambam is going to write clearly that even outside Israel, we have another day, right? We have Simchas Torah, but we don't begin that on Simchas Torah. We begin it on Shmini Atzeres. And at Tefilah Shachar Shol Yom Tov Shol Pesach. And we mention Geshem up until and including Shachris of the first day of Pesach. And from Musaf of the first day of Pesach, we start to switch over to Moedet Hatol. Halacha 16. Mishiva Yomim Bamar Cheshven. This is, my friends, Mashav Ruach, Moedet HaGeshem. That's called Zechira. What about She'ela? She'ela is not then. And by the way, you remember that whole sugya? We are Nedoinim Alamayim B'Chag. So why don't you make mention of Mayim in the first day of Sukkot? Because it's considered a klala if it rains on Sukkot, which is why you wait for the last day. And then you have to add to that people are traveling back from Aliyas L'Regel, and the farthest people live 2 weeks travel, so that means they only get home on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. So asking for rain, you wait until they get back home. And that is done until when? Kol Zman Shemasket HaGeshem, which is until the first day of Pesach. Now really, it's not that correct, because you for technical reasons, because already on Yom Tov, you don't have the middle brachas. You understand? That means you're going to say on the night of Maidav going into Pesach, you're going to still say Moedet Hatol. You're not asking for Geshem because you don't have the Baruch Aleinu. But it goes together. But that you start asking for rain on the 7th of Cheshvan only in the Holy Land. Avol b'shinor that Rambam calls Bavel Shinar, and Syria, and Mitzrayim, and in all of the locations that are surrounding and near the Holy Land. Sheyalam esek shamim b'yoyim shishim achar tekufas tishrei. You wait for 60 days after the autumnal equinox. And as he points out, whoever has here a chayenu in point 32, that even though this equinox now is counted as September 21st, right? However, we are going to be following the opinion of Mar Shmuel, as we'll speak more when we come to Kiddush HaChodesh, and that's why, right, we begin it on the 4th of December, or when you have a non-solar leap year on the 5th of December. It's not what the Goyim considers 60 days after the equinox, but it's what Halacha considers 60 days after the equinox, and let's leave it at that. Halacha Yud Zayin. There are places that need rain during summer, like far off islands. So then, here's the klal, my friends, that the moment the majority of what we consider the world doesn't need rain during summer, even though you need it, can be a whole country. It's viewed as an individual need, and every individual should add their needs during Shemay Tefilah. But to change the main Baruch Aleinu, asking for something that the Roif HaOlam not only doesn't need, but it's a curse for them to have the rain in the winter, in the summer, that's something that we don't do. Now, the Rambam is not speaking about living under the equator. We don't have time to speak about this right now. We'll speak about this another time. How it turned out, B'Hashgacha Pratis, is that even people that live under the equator end up davening like we daven not in Eretz Yisrael, but as the Jews that live above the equator. And there's a lot to do. There's a rush about that, but let's go right. So people who live over the equator, but they live in a place where they need to have rain in the summer, they ask for rain because it's like a tfilas yachid, and it's never going to be considered, right? We're not going to ask for it in Baruch Aleinu because the tzibur, meaning the world over the equator, doesn't need it, and it's a curse for them. Places that you have 2 days of Yom Tov, we say Moedet HaGeshem, not on the last day. The last day for us is Simchas Torah, but Musav Yom Rishon Shel Shmini Atzeres U'Mespalel V'Hoilech Kol Yemais Hagshamim, which is a big chiddush, because you can argue that why are we keeping another day? Why are we keeping Simchas Torah? It began because Shmini Atzeres might be the 7th day of Sukkot. There's a suffix. And we don't daven, like we mentioned, for rain, or we don't even mention the rain in Sukkot because it's a klala for it to rain in Sukkot. Nevertheless, we daven the tefillas Hageshem, even chutz la'aretz, on Shmini Atzeres. Imagine how when davening in Solar would never end. If not, we would add on Simchas Torah. It will be the whole day. Okay. Halacha Yudches, Kol HaShana Kula, Choysim HaBaracha Shlishi, so Keila Kodesh. Ubirchas Ashta Yasser Melech Oiv Tzedakah Mishpat. However, from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, how do we conclude the third bracha? HaMelech HaKadosh. Uba Ashta Yasser, we conclude saying HaMelech HaMishpat. Chevra final halacha Yutes. Yesh Mekoyim Shenohagu Lohoisev Aseres Hayomim Elu Bracha Rishayna Zochreinu L'Chaim, which is what we do. And in the second bracha we add Micha Moicha of Harachamim. Then you have the of Harachaman. We already spoke out how the Rambam wrote that the first 3 are never touched. Here you're adding, okay? And uba hoida'a, what do we add on hoida'a? We say Yochsoiv l'chaim tovim. The Rambam's nusach was choy rachamecha v'chulei. And they add in the final bracha, which is Sim Shalom, as we do b'sefer HaChaim. Number 1. Number 2, v'chein yesh mekaymes shenohagu lohoisev during the entire Aseres Yimei Tshuva in the third bracha, uv'chein tein pachtacha, and all of the other uv'cheins. That is something that is yesh mekaymes. By the way, that's not our minig. But then the Rambam concludes this Pedic by saying, but on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, during those 3 days, minak pashahu, for all, lohoisev vashlishis uv'chein tein pachtacha. So we have this very long third bracha that concludes with Hamelech HaKadosh. So B'kitzur, this Pedic dealt with the nusach of the bracha. It's very general to say Shmoina Esrei. Today we broke it down. It's not Shmoina Esrei. It's a Tesha Esrei, Esrim brachas, and all the differences. Shabbos, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, beautiful, simple. Now we're moving on to today's second chapter, Pedic Shlishi. Now we're starting. What we're going to learn now is the other detail of rabbinic prayer, and that is Zmanei Tefilah. We have to define when is the time to daven, when is the beginning time, when is the end time. And what happens now that you made a zman? People can miss the zman. Is there compensation? At times there is, and that's called tashlumin for tefillah. These are the halachas, chavra. Most of us, Pashut, by being observant Jews, we are familiar with these halachas. Let's remind ourselves, we don't paskin from the Rambam. Sometimes very similar is even worse. You say, I know this. But we're learning the Rambam. We're learning how the Rambam applies Zmanei Tefillah and Tashlumei Tefillah. Perek Shlishi has 11 halachas, starting with halacha Aleph, says the Rambam. Tefillah Sashachar, mitzvasa sheyaschel lehispalel im haneitz. And this mamish fits with the Rambam Shita that the time of Kriya Shema is not the first 3 hours of the day. It doesn't word it that way. Time of Kriya Shema is what we call today Vasikin. Time of Kriya Shema is to begin Birchais Kriya Shema around 6 minutes before nights. That's the time of Kriya Shema. And the Rambam doesn't say it here. It's so important to juxtapose Geula, which is the bracha after Shema, and Shemona Esrei. So automatically, Shemona Esrei is sunrise. That's mitzvasa. Uzmana ad soif shoravish. Until when? Max. Until the end of the 4th hour of the day, which is also, you can call this as a third of the day. And just to emphasize, we're speaking about sha'ois zmaniyos. Now, the beauty today is we have a luach and we just check up, but that's the time. Now, what happens v'im avar? If a person bemazed, transgressed, or inadvertently, that's called ta'ah, and he davened after 4 hours in the day, as long as he davened until when? What words do you have in your Rambam, Aaron? Ad Chatzoi Sayoim. My friends, it can't mean Chatzoi Sayoim, says the Kesav Mishnah, and the Kesav Mishnah, wherever that's the Beis Yosef. That lav dafka Chatzois, Rambam means until 12:30, not until midday. Guys, again, midday is not in your clock. Everything here is seasonal hours. Okay? But Shachris is to be davened until Mincha. We'll see, Mincha can only begin from 12:30. So the Kesav Mishnah says it must mean over here until midday be'erech. Then Yotze Yedei Chayvas Tefillah. Avol, look into the words. Lo Yotze Yedei Chayvas Tefillah Bizmana. You missed the Bizmana, but you fulfilled your Tefillah Shachar. In other words, there are two dinim. The Chachamim said, they formulated a time for davening, and they gave you how many tefillahs you should make. If you're going to daven Shemona Esrei after 12:30, you know what that tefillah is called? It's called Mincha. Shem shetefillah mitzvah min haTorah, kach mitzvah midivreim lispalel oisa bizmana, k'mo shetiknu lo chachamim u'neviim. Okay, halacha 2.
Does that mean if you don't, meaning they should really be dependent on each other?
They are dependent, according to the Rambam. You know, if you daven after 12:30 Shas Maniyas, you davened because it's mincha, or you can daven the whole day. In other words, davening Shemona Esrei, saying Shema, is called learning Torah if it's not done as the mitzvah. Davening is different. We learned that already yesterday. You can daven and you can add tefillas nadava, but the tefillah of Shachris, you missed. Halacha 2. Kvar amarnu shetfilas hamincha was made corresponding to Tamid Shaldein Arba'im Tiknu Uzmana. So now you know the times of it. Which olafi shahaya hatamid kariv b'chol yoyim. On a regular day. From when did they bring it? They brought it from 9.5 hours into the day, which is what we will call from 3:30. Not on your clock. Shosmaniya is. So therefore, the Rambam says, Tiknu Zmana Matesha Shoshomachs. Mincha is 3:30. And that's called Mincha Katana. Let me just speak out. We'll see in a moment. Mincha Gedoyla means when you have the most time to still daven Mincha if you didn't daven it yet. So from 12:30 until Shkia, you have more time. That's why it's called Gedoyla. From 3:30, it's less time. So in comparison to 12:30, 3:30 is called Katana. But there's less time left. Now, Olafi shebe'erev Pesach, Shchali is be'erev Shabbos. There, we would check the Tamid the earliest possible, which is at 6:30, right? Because a carbon, 12:30, I'm sorry, 6.5 hours into the day, because it would take an hour to bring the carbon Tamid. And then we wanted to give the most amount of time to shech the carbon Pesach. Amru shamispalal me'achar sheishasu mechza yotza. If you davened after what we call 12:30, then you're yotza. In other words, it's not ideal. If you did it, you're yoitze, and umishigia zman zeh, igia zman chiyuva, and that time is called mincha gedoyla. Let's daven it 3:30. If you davened it from 12:30, you're yoitze. Now says the Rambam something very interesting. Look at Halacha Gimel. Nohagu anoshim harbe to daven 2 minchas. You ever heard that? People daven 2 minchas. They would daven gedoyla, and they would daven the ketana, with the knowledge that one is obligatory and one is a optional prayer, because we are allowed to add optional prayers. Parenthetically, already in the times of the Shulchan Aruch, we are told not to add optional prayers because we lack kavanah. We're going to learn in the subsequent parakim that tefillah without kavanah is not a tefillah; it becomes a bracha levatala. So adding could be subtracting. But in those days, people were able, if they decided, I'm going to daven Shemona Esrei, it took you your 5 minutes, your 6 minutes, whatever it took you, and you knew you're going to have kavanah, so then the more the better. Halavai sheyispala koliyam kulei. And v'hoyde mixas hagoinim she'ein roi lispala reshus el agdoil. So the question now will be, which one should be the optional one? You have to know that. So the goinim says the first one should be the optional one. And like the Rambam wrote in the beginning, what did the Rambam paskin? What's the main mincha? Ketana. Because if you're doing 2, what is the most common? The most common is the Talmud Sherbein Arbaim was normally brought seasonal 3:30. So do the normal. And we have a rule, Tadr Kadr. However, then make sure that when you daven the Ketana, you should know that it is Rishus. Guys, Rishus also means that you have to add something. You would have to add something, ideally in every bracha, at least in the Shemei Tefilah again. Today, the Tur, like we mentioned already, the Tur, and the Shulchan Aruch says today we don't do this because we are afraid that people won't have kavanah, and what they felt was doing something good is actually going to be taking God's name in vain. Now,
so how do you add the personal prayers within the just by Shema Koleinu?
We do it Shema Koleinu and do it in the Hebrew tongue. Just remember that. That's another big important thing. And it's good to have personal prayer. It should be in the language of Shema. If someone is davening in English, they should say it in English. You can say, Oy Gewalt, that's maybe Lashon Kodesh. Oh no. I don't know, or ask for a prayer. Halacha Dalet. Holamadato. Shezman Mincha Gedoyla is Meshei Shoy Shomertza, Atei Shomertza, Atei Shoy Shomertza. Zman Mincha Ketana is from Teisha Shoy Shomertza. Now, this is a bomb. You're going to say, okay, until when? Ask a Jew now. Until Shkia. No. Now we're going to already mention Plaga Mincha. So let's go like this. The Tana Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you take the time between Mincha Ketana and Shkia, which is 2.5 hours, you divide that in half seasonally, but let's speak about that's an hour and a quarter. From that time on, it's considered night. Now, when it comes, we don't paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, but let's not forget, Zmanei Tefilah is midrabanan, and it's not midoiraisa. So we are allowed to opt. Today, I'm going to be a Rabbi Yehudanik. As long as I daven mincha before Plaga Mincha, I can consider after Plaga Mincha as night, not for the biblical Kriya Shema, no way, but for the rabbinic Zmanei Tefilah. So he says that Zman Tefilah Mincha Ketana is really only an hour and a quarter, from 3:30 until Ad Sheyishar Min Hayom, only an hour and a quarter. However, if you didn't daven Mincha in that hour and a quarter, then don't follow Rabbi Yehuda. It's not, and now you can even add Mincha until Halacha 5. Tfilas Amusafin. Zmana Achar Tfilas Hashachar. When does Musaf, the most key is, when the time is? Before you look at a clock, after Shachris. So if you daven Shachris with Nates, now I think it's already Nates, by 6:30 a.m., you can daven Musaf, 7 a.m. It's after. The question is until when? Until the 7th hour of the day. Now, if you daven Musaf after the 7th hour of the day, seasonal 1 p.m., even though that's called the act of negligence, but post facto you're yoitza. Why? Because you could daven it the entire day, as long as you're davening it before mincha. Okay, halacha 6. Tfilah so erev, afa p'sheina choiva, hamaspala loisa, zmano, mitchilas halayla, achi alamod hashachar. When we daven Ila Zmano, K'dei Sheyashlam Oisa, Samuch L'Shkia Sachamo. It's funny that we normally don't daven it Samuch prior, we daven the Ila Samuch after. But it's near. Halacha 7. Hamispalal Tefilah Koydem Zmano. The din is, my friends, Lo Yotzi Yedei Chavasei. And, yes, Yaakov.
Can I ask a question about halacha vav? When it says Amal in that chayma, it's talking about this.
The origin. We're going to see. We'll see an application of that. I think I said wrong when I said it's only rabbinic. It's more than that. Since it's not chayva, that's why we can follow Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to see an application of we have to do it, but it's not a chayva. We have to do a minik. You have to do the minik. Okay, luyotz. And you have to daven again. However, even though the Rambam says it's from the nates, you can stretch it back. Post facto, shachris can be done after Amud and Yotza. What we didn't have, not yesterday, not by Shema, not by Tefilah, is this Mishayakar. Just to know, the Rambam doesn't mention that. He speaks about nates or Amud. We have a whole new thing, but that's the Rambam doesn't touch it. Here we go, Yaakov. The commentators write, even though the Rambam is speaking about Friday night, lav dafka Friday night. Even Friday night. You can daven ma'ariv before sunset. You know when? Again, to speak it out. In the after Plaga Mincha, if you daven Mincha before Plaga Mincha. Even the biggest chiddush, because here you're davening ma'ariv on Shabbos. You're davening ma'ariv on Shabbos. Doesn't mean chas v'shalom you can break malachas. Malachas means if I'm going to daven ma'ariv on Shabbos afternoon, I'm davening mincha before Plaga Mincha, I'm going to daven ma'ariv, I'm going to say Havdalah, but I can't do malacha yet. Lefisha tfilas arvis, here we go, that's the key. I hope if I said it wrong, I stand corrected now. Not because zmanei tfilas midrabanan, because ma'ariv is considered a reshus. And therefore, even though we have to do it, but since it began as a reshus, ein medagdekin bizmana. How great is that? That's why we can say, I paskan like Rabbi Yehuda. In other areas in halacha, I cannot, people that are very learned, imagine every day you get to choose which Tana you're going to follow. We're going to have almost different religions. You don't get to do this by this, yeah? However, Shema has to be read after Tzei Sakir Chavin. And like we mentioned, and if you're davening ma'ariv on Shabbos early, then you have to wait to break any of Shabbos until, you know who does this nowadays? Just to know, it's tragic. No one should know that if someone is in a state of aninus over Shabbos, an oinen doesn't make Havdalah. So what they do is that they daven ma'ariv early. Since it's taka mehilcha Shabbos, it's Shabbos. On Shabbos there's no aninus, and you make Havdalah. You don't light the candle, you're not allowed to do that. You don't do anything that's a malach. Herst? You know, you make Havdalah also after Shemona Esrei, because it's still Shabbos for Hilchas Shabbos. It's like a funny thing. Okay, let's go weiter. Now, the final topic of this Pedic, which is called Tashlumin. We should be familiar with all this. Tashlumin means, if not b'mezid, we'll see. Certain times, if I miss the prayer, I can compensate for it. Call me, says Halacha Ches. Call me, she'avar olav zman tefillah v'lo yispalel b'mezid. Then, ein lo yitakana ve'ein lo mishalem. Parenthetically, again, prior to the times of the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, whenever there was an option of adding what we call Tfilas Nadava, people would add Tfilas Nadava. But it's not compensation. I missed this, I'm doing something else. Compensation means is that there is a way to mamish make up the lost tefillah. However, if it was b'shoigeg, or it was b'shoigeg means it was unintentional. Oinus means I knew I'm missing the time. I knew it, but I had no option. There was something that was pressing my attention. Halachically, I was not allowed to daven it. Oisha ya'anus, or if a person was very distracted, and what did we learn before? We just learned this today. If a person is very distracted, they gave you an option to say the Havinenu. What happens if a person is very distracted? They have no kavan. They couldn't daven. Now, you can compensate for the one lost one, not for two, but for the last one that you lost. When? During the zman of the subsequent tefillah. In other words, if a person, let's say, missed Shachris, they daven 2 minchas. Now, which one of the two is for which one? The first one is for the current, and the second one, this is important because if you go into Matzah Shabbos, let's say, and you're davening Maitiv for Mincha, even though Maitiv is a new day, the Rambam clearly writes that you can daven Maitiv for Mincha, the first Maitiv will have Atachain Antonu. Because the first Maitiv is Maitiv, and the second one, even though Mincha Shabbos is Ata Echad. Here you're davening a bona fide 19 blessing Amida prayer, doesn't matter. But you don't add Atachain Antonu because it's for the Mincha. Umagdim Tefilah Shebizmana first, V'achrei Mispalel Es Atashlumin. Halacha 9, examples.
When you're doing Musaf after the 7th hour?
Musaf we don't make tashlumin for. Let's see. Musaf we don't make tashlumin for. Ketzad Tov Lispalel Shachris. If a person didn't daven Shachris by mistake, what's that? V'avar Chatzi Hayoim. Nachamol Aaron, Kesav Mishnah says Chatzi Hayoim La Davke. He's going. Chatzi means 12:30. Well, you know better Chatzi Hayoim. Yispalel Mincha Shtayim. Daven 2 minchas. But the first one is Mincha, and the second one is called Tashlumei Shachris. Or Tov Lo Yispalel Mincha Sheshaka Chamo. Yispalel Arvis Shtayim. There's a chiddush over here. No, we don't say Avar Yoimei Batal Karbani, even though Maitiv is a new calendar date. We don't do that. Another chiddush. Irishoina Arvis Shnia Tashlumei Mincha. Another chiddush. Tov Lispalel Arvis Achalamud Shachar. Here you can think that even though normally, just like there's a chiddush to say that we don't say Avar Yoimei Batal Karbani, there's another chiddush. Tfilos are in the place of Karbanis. Kachim Hayoim Halaylo Hoylach Achar Hayoim. Which is why the Rebbe says Tilas Hashem begins with Moeda'ani, begins with Shachris, not with Maitiv. So you would also maybe think that if I missed Maitiv, the next day is new Karbanis. You could, no matter which one of the three, not Musaf, Shachris, Mincha, Maitiv, you can make up in the next one, as long as it was not bemazed. Mispalel Shachris Shtayim, the first one is for Shachris, and the second one is Tashlumei Arvis. Right in the Beis HaMikdash.
It's called bemazed.
What's called? That's a good question. And if you have to have a good Rav that understands and will basically never apply Mazid. Aaron, you have a very good point.
The Shalom does not mean to complete.
To compensate here, to compensate, and that completes it. Make it complete. Very good. Halacha Yud. Now you can only do it one time. If a person the shoygig, not the Mazid, right? You missed Shachris and Mincha. Mincha Maitiv Shachris. Ein mishalem ella achreina bulvad. You can only make up the last one prior to the current one. Ketzad. Tovli spalo loy shachris loy mincha. You're talking gonna daven Maitiv Shtayim. The first one for Maitiv. The second one is for Mincha. Avol shachris ein la tashlumin. Ein la tashlumin. If you want to do Tefilas Nadava, you can do it when we used to do Tefilas Nadava. Shekfar avar zmano v'chein b'shar Tefilos. Final halacha Yud Aleph. Hoyu lefan of shtei tfilos, shal mincha v'shal musafin. Oh, by the way, the Rambam didn't mention musaf. I don't know why this got cut off, but that's it. It is what it is. But there's no tashlumin for musaf, because since musaf is only about the korban musaf, unlike other Shmoyne Esrei that there are supplications. Even though on Shabbos and Yontiv we take out the supplicational part, but it's in the place of the Tamid. That's something. That we don't do. Now, halach Yud Aleph, what happens if there are two tefillas, which is Mincha and Musaf? Now, we just mentioned, when does Musaf begin? After Shachris. So that it's not always that way. If you finish davening Shachris at 11 a.m., you're not going to have lefan of two tefillos. But if you finished later, or even if you finished Shachris earlier, but you didn't yet daven Musaf, so then it's Shayach. The moment it's 12:30 p.m., 12:30 seasonal time, if you already daven Shachris, so now it's Musaf and Mincha. Says the Rambam, Mispalel shal Mincha v'achar kach Mispalel shal Musafin. You know why? Because there is a rule. What's the rule called? Tadar v'she'ena tadar koydem. However, why don't you know about that? I'll tell you why. Because v'yesh mi shemayra, that on a communal level you're not allowed to do that. Why? Because people are going to see that you're davening Mincha and then you're davening Musaf. What will people do? Don't forget, when did they daven Shachris by the Rambam? By Neitzach Chama. If they're going to see Mincha before Musaf, they will mistakenly think that even if it's prior to Zman Mincha, daven mincha before musaf, because tada v'sheina tada koydem. Okay, gewaltig. Chavra, let's move on.
Can you explain that again, the last one?
Yes.
Why are you davening first?
Mincha daven, because there's a rule that whenever you have tada v'sheina tada koydem. Even though really Avremel that in the Beis Hamikdash Tefilas the Talmud shall bein arbaim oleh hashlim kol karbanis kulam mitzvahs asay, with the only exception of a carbon pesach. And b'diavad other karbanis could have been brought. Nevertheless, it's not a carbon; it's a prayer. And the rule of tada v'she'eino tadar will trump this concept theoretically. Elama b'tzibur don't do that, because again, if we're going to daven mincha before musaf, people might think that you should always daven mincha before musaf, like you're thinking here in our shul. Anyways, whenever we daven musaf, it's almost afternoon, even on Shabbos, certainly on Yom Tov, and then Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But in many places, it's going to be before the Zman mincha, and they're going to daven mincha b'shaloi b'zman, which doesn't count for anything. Okay, final. It's good we have the time that we need. This line is falling. It's a pity. Going live again. Okay. Perek Revi is the 5 prerequisites of prayer. This is such an important perek. And then I push it. There's 5. That means even though it's the zman of prayer, the following 5 are needed prior to davening. We have in this perek 19 halachas. All 5 are discussed over here. Halacha Aleph. Chamisha devarim ma'akven es atfilah. Ma'akven means that without it, you don't have the tefillah, even though it's already the time to daven. Number 1, everyone will be explained. Taharas yodayim. Guys, there's something called Tara, there's something called Kedusha. And the Rambam understands the washing of the hands to be connected to the inyan of Tara, not to the inyan of Kedusha, with a lot of halachic consequences, but ve'ein kan mekoyme. Number 2, v'kisui ha'erva. You have to cover the nakedness. Number 3, taras mekoyma tefillah. You have to make sure, as he'll explain, that the place where you are davening is halachically pure. Number 4, udevarim ha'chayvzim oisai. You have to make sure that things that might be distracting you is resolved. When a person is in a state of being distracted, as we'll see, you cannot daven. And number 5, the kavanas halev, the proper intention of one's heart, even though the muhus hatfila is verbal she'elas tzarachav, but it's called avodah shabalev, and avodah shabalev means there has to be a inner involvement in the tefillah. And now let's go halacha beis. Actually, the first one will be the one that will be elaborated a lot. First precondition is called taharas hayadayim. Keitzad, how so? Explain that. Says the Rambam, roichitz yadav b'mayim. One has to wash one's hands with water. Ad haperek. The Rambam, like the Gemara, is very vague. There's a 3-way machloikas in the Rishonim. What joint is the perek? And the presumption is, since the Rambam is a Talmud of the Rimigash, who was a Talmud of the Rif, so the Rif should have a lot of, and the Rif is the one that says that in the Tilas Yodayim, the perek means what we call the wrist. So the presumption is that so is Shitas Harambam. Let's leave it at that. And then daven. And this washing your hands with water is so important that if a person is traveling and he's saying traveling, you know why? Because practically if you are at home, you're going to make sure you have water. But if you're traveling, people don't schlep water with them, or people schlepped water with them, but it was a very hot day, they don't have water anymore. So if in the direction that you're traveling, if you will keep on going between you and where you presume you'll have water, there is a distance of up until 4 mil. A mil is around a kilometer, but 4 mil, which is 8,000 amas, then you have to walk ad mukayim amayim v'roichetz v'achar kach yispalel. And guys, appreciate, especially when it comes to Shachris, unlike Mincha, that we learned, let's go with the Rambam, 3:30, but the Rambam says Mincha is an hour and 15 minutes. Ma'ariv is from Seis the whole night. Shachris is with nates. If you start with that, which is very important, you're not going to do that. Water is more important. You got to get the water. Now, on this distance of 4 mil, then, mamish like we learned with Shema, then one, the pasuk says, erchatz b'nekoyoin kapai. Erchatz, not bamayim, been a kohen. So Chazal say water is the best. But if you don't have water, then if you rub your hand off something hard, at least a more coarse impurity that might be stuck will be cleansed off. Do that.
Krishma, you don't walk anywhere.
Krishma, you don't walk anywhere. Very good. Halacha Gimel. That's when you're traveling, and lefanov means that if within 4 mil, but in your direction, you have to walk to the water. What happens if, from your knowledge, in the direction that you're going, it's not going to be water? There's water behind. Do you have to turn around? So here also, but a much smaller shear. Or 4 mil, only up until 1 mil. But if the water is more than the mil, guys, whoever learns Gemara, and we should all learn Gemara, just like you can be Medaik in a Mishnah, there's these contradictions. You can be Medaik also the same contradiction. You can make a stira between the Reish and the Sefer, just to be aware of all that. Because first he writes, Ad mil. Then he writes, anyway, Mekanech Yadav u'mispal. When we only are speaking about hands, we are speaking about all the other tefillos other than Shachris. When it comes to Shachris, you know what the Rambam holds? You know you have to do Roichitz, Panav, Yadav, Viraglov. Wow. Now I want you to know, aside of the Ravid that argues over here, that the Taz understands in the Rambam writes Raglov for people that walk around barefoot. If you're not walking around barefoot, which is already, then you don't have to wash the Raglov, but you have the Panav. The Alter Rebbe doesn't speak about Panav. There's a lot over here about understanding. The Alter Rebbe Bechlal connects the washing of the hands not that much as a preparation for Shachris, but in the morning as a hachana for the avodah of the entire day. Here it's linked more with the avodah of Shachris. Shachris is connected the Tamid. In the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohanim would wash Yadav V'Raglov. Then the question is, where did he get Panav? There's a lot on this Rambam.
So does the Rambam speak about a time frame of how far before Shabbos is to happen?
Right before. Don't forget also that people that Rambam already wrote, the Rambam was not a fan of going to sleep early. The Rambam, remember we learned in the Hilchas Deis, means you're waking up basically and you're going to daven. So you're waking up, what we would do, you would wash your hands, your feet, and your face. And then, and therefore, what are you doing? You're doing this kinuach. You don't do the kinuach of your face or the kinuach of your feet. Rubbing your hands on something as a worst case scenario when there's no water, that's only for your hands. Halacha Dalet, just like we spoke yesterday, B'negeya the dinim of Tuma and Shema, and Tfilas Ezra and Shema. In that context, we're looking at Shema more as Divrei Torah. Now we're speaking specifically about prayer. Very similar. Kol hatmeim roichetz in yedayim bolvad kitohoyrim amispalalim. And not what? And not your only Rishon. If you were to go to the mikvah, you would mamish take away the tumah of Rishon. You might as well go to the mikvah. No. This precondition of tahara is hands. Nevertheless, ein hatfila ma'akeves. V'kvar beyarnu, that Ezra made an enactment, shelo yikra bal keri bilvad, b'divrei Torah ad sheyitpoil. And guys, divrei Torah is not tefillah. That's why this was mentioned yesterday when we learned Kriya Shema. But now that Rambam is adding, ubeis din she'amdu achar kach, there was an add-on to it. The Beis Din after Ezra added after tefillah shelo yispal bal keri, unless they go to the mikvah. This was not mentioned yesterday because yesterday we were learning the laws of Kriya Shema. There was for a while this enactment, and as they discovered, the Rambam is going to write that people were not makabel this, they were not makabel that either. Now, very important. It's not because of Tuma and Tara, because if that would be the case, then it wouldn't be only regarding Balkedi. Then they would have said, listen, if you're only a Rishon, go to the mikveh. It wasn't that. Elo, Kidei, Shalayu, Talmidei Chachamim, Mitzuyin, Eitzel, Nishriseyim, the expression of Chazal is, Ketar Nagoyim, that are always very busy. Only, V'hoitziyu, Michlal, other Tameim. Halacha Hei, Lefikach, Hoyu oimrim bisman takanazu. That's why during the time where people were adhering to this enactment, that even if you have a zav is someone who's tummy on the level of an av. And if a zav goes to the mikvah, it doesn't take away tumah zav. I'll tell you something better. A zav has to go on a mayon. A balkedi can go only into a mikvah. But since it's about this concept of you're going to be with your wife, you can't daven and learn, so that would so to say indirectly cause a higher amount of separation, which is what they wanted at the time of Ezra. So even if a zav sees a keri, or even more a woman who's a nida, who had a relation with her husband, if she knows that some of the zera of the man was emitted from her body, right? Or umishameshes shiro asodam nida, tzrichim tefila l'kriyah shema. Because it's especially for Tumas Keri. V'chein le'tefila, Kriya Shema because of a Divrei Torah. Tefillah is because, like we said today, the Beis Din after Ezra extended it to Tefillah, Mepnei HaKeri, Afal Pi Shehem Tameim, even though they're going to be Tamei anyways. V'chein Adin Noisen, She'en Tefillah Zu Mepnei Tara, El Mepnei HaGzeira, Shaliyu Mitzuyin Eitz L'Shem Tamid. It's logical because if that would not be the case, they would not specify Balkeri. However, as we learned by Hilchas Kriya Shema, Kfar Bat Legam Takanu Zu Shel Tefillah, sounds like that the first bittul was concerning Torah, and Gam, just like it was enacted in steps, it was everyone was notified that it's nullified in steps. Lefi Shalei Pashta B'Chol Yisrael. And why? Okay.
Didn't that stop people, women specifically, from davening and from did it slow it down?
No, it made people go to the mikvah. Now the Rambam is writing something about what we call the 9 kabim, which is amazing.
But included in their dam either, right?
No. So if a woman had a relation with her husband and then she became a nida, she would still go to the mikvah to daven. Why would she go to the mikvah? She's a nida anyway, and for nida you have to wait until the end of the nidos, or today you have to have shivas nekiyim, just for tumas keri.
How is it so easy to go to the mikvah then? So difficult today.
Halacha vav minag pashat b'shinur b'sfard. Listen to this. The minig became both in Babylonia and in Sfard. She'ein bal keri mispalel. Even though batla tfilas Ezra, you know what you need? I want you to know what this means. Roichetz kol b'sorei b'mayim doesn't mean to take a bath. It means to have 9 kav of water thrown on top of you. B'koyach adam, which just when you approach it, that's not even a shower. That's someone just like b'netilas yadayim. B'koyach adam throwing the 9 kav is around. Avram Chaim notes 12.4 liters of water. Mishum, because it says he koine knasa lekecha Yisrael. Okay, bebody, a healthy person, or even someone who's not healthy but who had a seminal emission because they had a relation. But even when you are adhering to this minig, if you have a person who is not well, who's having involuntary seminal emissions, not while he was having a relation, so that they did it. So they told him, okay, even the minig, you don't have to have this 9 kavim. Patam in a rechitza, and the Rambam writes, and therefore, if someone is going to be machmer, we're speaking about a choila who had some zera leave their body, and they're not going to say kriya shema or tefillah because of the minig, that's not a good minig. So it's in that case, go daven and learn. Don't be mevatel Torah or davening. V'chein zav shira keri, or nida, like we just mentioned, shepalta shichva zera. Even when they lived in these areas where there was this minig, you don't have to go to the mikvah, which was harder, have the 9 kavim thrown. Says the Rambam, in these cases, no, don't do it. What you have to do is you have to push it physically. Clean yourself. Atkan, the first precondition. Let's move on. Halacha zayin is the second prayer step, and that is kisui ha'erva. Unlike Hilchos Kriya Shema, where all we mentioned is that the actual genitalia should be covered, and there should be the heart should not see the erva. So we said that theoretically, if a person today was just wearing pants and he's bare-chested, he can read the Shema. That's not enough for tefillah. For tefillah, there's an additional amount of covering. Kisu ever keitzad afa pisha kisei v'asoi k'derech shemachas mal Kriya Shema. Cover the erva, and there is a mechitza between the heart and the erva. Lo yispalel. You have to now put on a talis cotton, or put on a t-shirt. Achi yechases liboy. You have to cover your heart. Don't be bare-chested. Ve'im lo yichisa liboy, oy shenenas ve'im lo b'mei yechase. So after, post-facto, b'di'evid, hoye l'kisa rebasim yispal yotza, but l'chatchila lo ya'asem. Halacha 8. This is precondition now number 3. Tahara mekoim atfila ketzad lo yispal b'makam atinoifis. So the Rambam is really, we had yesterday a very lengthy, Pedic about all of the rules of Kriya Shema, so it's going to be very similar. Don't daven in a play of filth, v'loy b'merchatz, not in a bath, not in a latrine, not on or in a pile of garbage, v'loy b'makim she'eno, not here on the sidewalks in LA, because of the homeless, it's mamash, you're not allowed to daven there. V'loy b'makim she'eno b'cheskas tara, until you make sure that there's nothing filthy. If there is a chazaka that is excrement there, there's no chazaka that it's clean. Kloli shel davar. So here the Rambam doesn't have to repeat all the details. This is the rule. Any place in which you may not read the Shema, ein mispalelin boi. And furthermore, not only in it, ukeshem shemarchikin mitzvah me'meraglayim v'reich lamin ameis umin ameis and l'miniyas erva kriya Shema. All of the above will apply also regarding davening, Shmoina Esrei, davening, Halacha 9, Hamispalel, and after you davened, you found Tsoya b'mekaimai in your place of prayer, Hoyel v'chata, mipnei shalei badek achalei yispalel. So they penalized you, Chayzer hamispalel, makam tar, gotta daven again. Hoya oime b'tfilah, and during davening, mitamol, you see Tsoya kenegdoi. So normally we think, I'm davening Shemona Esrei, I'm not budging. No. In middle of the Shemona Esrei, you're going to move away. Im yachal halach lefanav. Now, ideal, remember we learned yesterday for Shema, the best thing is to have the source of dirt behind you. Certainly not in front of you. So there is front, side, and behind. If you can walk straight, there's no river in front of you. You can walk ahead by leaving the tsoya behind you, daladamis, kadeshes, garamas. That's ideal. In middle of Shemona Esrei. But if not, for technical reasons, you can't distance yourself by having the tzoya behind. The guys, don't forget, we're davening towards Yerushalayim. You can't say, big deal, I'll turn the other way. No, we have to face the same direction. So then put it on your side. Like you're standing in front of a river, you notice tzoya, can't walk ahead, walk to one of the sides. Then Yisal cannot, let's daden. For whatever reason, you can't go away from the tzoya, stop Shemona Esrei. It's that important. Gedolei Chachamim lo yehoyim mispalalim in a house in which they made beer, or in which there was beer, nor in a house in which they had murias. Murias is the Ashkenazic yellow guk in the gefilte fish, some sort of fish brine. Be'eis ipushe, while it's foaming. L'chayr, it's going both on the beer and on the fish, because sherei chayra. Now, this is only called Gedolei Chachamim, which means that, maybe it's some sort of odor that other people don't find it to be that repulsive. Afapi, that the place is tahar. Halacha Yud is moving on to the 4th precondition. Dvarim hachayvzim oisei. Things that might bother you or distract you, or something that you should be mindful of prior to davening. Im hayetzarech lenekavav, that's the most important. If a person has to relieve oneself, don't daven. Now the Rambam writes furthermore, v'chalatzarech lenekavav yispalel. Look at these words. Very rarely do we use the words abomination. Tefilah si toyeva. It's a disgusting tefillah. And then v'choyzenim espalal achar sheyas etzrachav. Not only before, but makam tzoya, it's a penalty. Here it's like it's not a penalty. You didn't daven yet. Your tefillah is toyeva. Now, what does it mean you have to go to the bathroom? Speak to men over 50. You can be going every hour so the rule is like this, that if you can hold yourself in for the time that it takes you to walk 1 parsa, guys, 1 parsa, Tzemach is shaking his head, is 4 mil. Now, 4 mil, that's the big machloikas. How long does it take to walk 1 mil, right, guys? The 3 opinions. Let's go to the 18 minutes or 24 minutes. So 4 mil is 72 minutes or 96 minutes. If a person knows that they can hold themselves in for 72 minutes or 96 minutes, then that's fine. Tefilah say tefilah. It means if a person has bladder issues and they go to the bathroom once an hour, then they can't daven. Davenish. Or it just means if they already feel the uncomfort, then don't daven.
They could DM me for advice.
Okay. Afal pikein lechatchila lo yispalel. Afal pikein means even though I can hold myself back in for the next 72 minutes. Lechatchila, don't do that. Now, they didn't have bathrooms the way we had today. It was a big thing. You have to go outside, you have to go to a back house. It was dark, it was cold. So they avoided going to the bathroom. Right? The long life, the Gemara says in Brachas, one of the things is to live near a Beis HaKisei. We're living longer, maybe also because of that. And not only relieving yourself by going to the bathroom, but a person can have phlegm, they can have mucus, or any other thing that can become bothersome, and only then should they daven. Now, halacha yudalev, guys, this is gavaldik. Mi shegihek, someone who burps, upiek or yawns, venes atesh or sneezes during his davening. Im l'retzoynai, it's called meguna. It's pashat nish shein. It's nish nice. It's not tayeva. They don't tell him daven again, but it's not nice standing in front of God. V'im bada gufei kodem sheyispalel, and I didn't think I'll have to burp, but it came out. Im bekach klum. Don't feel bad. You did yours. We're humans. If a person in middle of davening saliva came up, either mavliya betalisai. That's why people had these kerchiefs for that, for many things. To wipe your hands, to put it as a thing around your neck, and also to put your mucus in there. It was a multifunctional, put it in your talus or in your garment. But if it bothered you, like our generation, how are you going to put it in your garment? You're going to have mucus on your garment, so what would people think? So spit it out. Spitting out mucus. We're not speaking about our minig, our beautiful minig Lubavitch to spit when we say the word Shem Shtach. That's a gavaldik thing. We're speaking about if a person has phlegm in their mouths, they're not allowed to spit that out on the Beis HaKnesses. But on the other hand, you're not allowed to daven. So instead of spitting it out, spit it in your hand and throw it behind you. Now, if a person vent wind himself, it happened, then you have to wait until the ruach goes away, and then you return to your prayer. Halacha 12. If a person, not it happened, it's about to happen, and it's very uncomfortable to hold it in. You know what you have to do? Stop where you're at. Walk away from your place. Walk away 4 amas. Then the person will expel the gas. Then you wait in that new location until it doesn't smell bad, and you give an apology to God by saying, Ribono Ha'ilamim, Yitzartanu nekavim chalul mechalula, Go levidu lefanecha, cherposenu chlimosenu, cherpo chlima b'chayenu. And that's when we're alive. After we're living, b'chlal to'ela v'rima b'misosenu. How wonderful! And then we walk back to our place and we daven.
Does it include shadows?
Yes. No, so Rabbi Chen is pointing out that when a person is wearing tefillin, a person is not allowed to do that. And remove the tefillin. Very good point. That's the gufnaki. This is only for tefillah. Good. Halacha yud gimel hoyo oime betefillah v'natvu meid aglav al birkov. You noticed, oops, it's trickling some urine down my knees. This is mastama after 60. We'll find out. Let's see, it's an age thing. So here, so wait until you stop feeling that trickle. No, it's a person lost their bladder control. So mamtin achiyichlu amayim, and then continue davening Shemona Esrei. Where are you up to now, guys? That I'm mistaking it for a given that we'll remember what we learned yesterday. If you have exposed urine, you're not allowed to say Shema. You can't daven. So we're speaking about someone, a little trickle. So maybe even if the undergarments are wetted, as long as the beged elyon is dry, you're good. I'm speaking about people that are very old and they have to wear an adult diaper. That's fine, because the beged elyon is clean. That's the case. But if they needed to wait for the trickle to stop, it took up a couple of minutes, the time that it would have taken them to finish Shemona Esrei, then they have to go back to the beginning. Halacha 14. Someone urinates. Another din, b'chlal. And only then daven. What did we learn? It's called, the Gemara says, a shida the Beis HaKisei is still with you. Wait. Or in the opposite, if a person is davening and they have to go into the bathroom. Guys, this is important. If a person is davening or learning Torah, don't close the book and run into the bathroom, because this is a good thing. When you're into davening or learning, without your knowledge, many times your lips are still moving. You don't want to daven or learn in the bathroom. So, shoya achar tfilah kedei yelach arba amas. If I'm not mistaken, they say kedei yelach arba amas is 5 seconds. Wait, huh?
It's much less than
it's much less than that, I know that. But I think it means to wait a couple of seconds and then go to the bathroom to make sure that the words are stopping to leave your mouth. Halacha, final 15. Oh, we have a minute for tzvika. Let's go. Oh, we have a long way to go. Kavanas halev ketzad. What's pshat kavanas halev? Guys, this is the bomb. Kol tefillah she'ena b'kavana ein tefillah. That's a very powerful statement. If you don't have kavana, it's not a tefillah. And the Rambam writes, "Ve'im ispalal b'lei kavana." You know what the Rambam writes? You go back and daven again. Now, aside of Tosfos and we now who follow Tosfos that says don't daven again, not because your tefillah was good. Don't daven again is because who is telling you that when you're going to daven again, you'll do it with kavana? You might again not have kavana. That's the Tosfos and Brachas. Shema Yisrael is only 6 words. Say it again, you'll have kavana. Aside of that, the Rambam himself in Perek Yud and Halacha Beis writes clearly that if a person davens and he didn't have kavana, the Rambam writes Yachzer v'yispalol b'kavana, and then the Rambam writes in Perek 10 Ve'im kiven liboy bebracha r'shoina shuv ein tzarech lispalol. A clear contradiction, and that's Rab Chaim. That there's 2 types of kavanas. This is the big topics. There's a general kavana, which is what we're talking about over here. I have to be mindful that I'm standing in front of God. I need that for the whole Shemana Esrei. And then in Perek Yud, we're going to learn about the specific Perish Hamilas kavana. Let's leave it at that. And there, the first one is essential, and the other ones are not. Since, guys, let's go back to today's Perek. If you daven without intention, your tefillah is not a tefillah. So if a person finds himself confused or in a troubled state, and for example, if you come from a trip, it doesn't mean today flying on an airplane. It means then they would travel, they would walk. It was a whole different type of trip. And the person is tired or he's irritated. Or maybe even today, if I had a bad experience, calm down first. Amru Chachamim, you know what you have to do? Yisha shloishe yamim. Rest for 3 days. And then daven. And there's 2 things. First of all, travel was much more rigid. Number 2, the level of kavana that the Rambam is speaking about is something that we anyways don't have, so we don't apply this. But the concept is that important. Halacha 16. Mamish, that's a big difference. Here you have to hold tefillah. What kavanah are we talking about? Halacha 16. Sheyefane es liboy mikol hamachshavos. A person should clear one's mind from all worldly thoughts. V'yira atzmai ki'ilu hu oimed lefnei hashchina, and see yourself standing in front of the Shechina. Lefikach tzarech leishav ma'at koydem atfila lachaven es liboy. You can't just boom daven Shemana Esrei. And v'achar kach yispalal benachas. Benachas is to say the words clearly, ubesachnunim, in order it should be avodah shebelev, heartfelt. Getting rid of, getting it out of the way. Even if you want to just get over with the tefillah, then when you will finish davening, you're going to go back to your life. The fact that you want to daven will also imply that after davening you don't run back. But only wait a little bit. Today we have all these additions, which is how we wait. The Rebbe holds that this kavana, the ikar kavana of Yefana Liboy and you're davening in front of the Shechina, the Rebbe makes a correlation that just like things that have to be done lishma, even though ideally lishma is throughout, but if you had kavana lishma prior to in the beginning, you're writing a get. L'shmoi l'shma l'shem gerushin. The ikar is in the beginning. This is beikar the effort. The ikar effort is before you daven Shemana Esrei. Weiter. Halacha Yud Zayin. Shikir al yispalol, because he doesn't have kavana. This type of ve'im yispalol tefilosoi toy eva. Lefika chayzerum yispalol kishi yisroikin mishakrusi, when he sobers up. Now, there's someone that's called a shasui. A shasui is someone who had some wine, but they're not called a shikir. The Rambam is going to explain what's the line that crosses over from a shasui to a shikir. A shasui should not daven, but if he daven, this tefillah is a daven. What's a shikir? If you are so under the influence that you cannot speak to a king properly. Shasui means and you won't, make a mistake, your words won't be slurred. Afal pikein, like we said, lo yispalal at sheyasa yeina meyolav. Halacha yutches, if ein oimnem lispalal lo yimitoich schoik. Laughter, irreverent behavior, not right after having a shmooze, not after having an argument, not in anger. That's the best prep. And there's many levels of learning Torah. There's learning something in depth, also not ideal. If a person is in the middle of making a judgment, so they're really into a sugya, they're going to be thinking about their judgment. Or even if a person is in the middle of having a halachic debate, not good time to daven. You're going to be thinking about, not the machshavos that are not positive, but they're going to be zoroist for the prayer. What part of Torah has no inyan? Halachos psukos. Learn the Rambam before davening. Learning Gemara is more challenging because you're going to be thinking about the whole sugya. Here it's simple. Relative simple. Halacha, you test the final halacha. Tefilahs haprakim. Occasional prayers. In other words, you don't say them every day. Like even Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, the davenings of Moyados. They didn't have a siddur then. People would daven it by heart. Or even if people have a siddur, sometimes they're not familiar with the digduk of the letters. So the Rambam says, tzarich lahastir tefillah. So first, you have to review your prayers to make sure you know them clearly, and then stand and daven, kidei, not to make a mistake when you're davening them. At the end, this is the end of today's chapter. So we began today we learned about Havinenu. What we're learning now is way beyond Havinenu. Now that we mentioned Kavana, what happens if a person says, I cannot have Kavana to daven Shemona Esrei, but if the prayer would only be a very short prayer, I could have Kavana. Davening without Kavana is nothing. Now we're going to say to daven the short davening. For example, you're walking in a dangerous place, or you're standing you're pushing, you're in danger. You got to be mindful. Someone is going to, bandits are here. What should you do? Mispalol bracha achas. This is not what we learned today, Pedig Beis, Halacha Beis. This is not Avinenu. And this is the whole prayer. There's no 3 in the beginning, there's no 3 in the end. This is what you say. Sarchei Amcha Yisrael Merubim. V'daitom Kitsara. Yihiratzim l'fanech Hashem Elokeinu. Shetitin l'chol echad v'echad kadei parnasasai. U'l'chol gvia dei machsoirei. V'hatoiv be'enecha asei. Baruch ato Hashem. Shemei Tefilah. Tzvika is about to say this. You understand? It's so late already. Tefilah Kitsara. Now you have to understand one thing over here. By the way, what you see over here? You see that the mehus, these are the words of the Rebbe, of Tefilah, is bakashas tzrachav. It's asking for your needs, because here you don't have praise. If you have to really squeeze down halachically, it's verbally asking for your needs. Now, you should know something. You can even say it when you're walking. If you can stop, stop. But here's the key. If I daven, Havinenu, Pedig Beis, Halacha Beis, it's a bona fide prayer. If I daven this, if I come to my destination before that Zman Tefilah is up, you got to daven the normal davening. Then Chayzerim Espal Tefilah Kitakana, which is Tisha Asa Brachas, unlike the Havinenu, that does not have to be repeated. Gevaldik, to be continued.
On Sukkot,
Thank you.